Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Hemenway, and today I have my colleague Luke Wright here with us. We're going to be bringing you our next session of your morning briefing, and we hope to provide some helpful tips on how to handle leave and accommodation issues that you may be dealing with. We're going to touch on the top 5 mistakes that we see employers making or that we get calls about. And hopefully, when you're done today, you'll have some good information that'll help you handle these issues more fluidly and easily in your own workforce. So before we get started, I wanted to give a couple of housekeeping updates. First, this this webinar has been approved for half hour of credit for HRCI and SHRM credit, as well as CLE credit. So we'll give instructions on how to submit for that at the end of the webinar. And just keep in mind that the webinar, the information we're sharing today, is for general informational purposes. As we'll talk about, leave and accommodation issues are very fact specific, and what works in one situation may not work in another. So, we may use examples or talk through issues. Just keep in mind that you're going to want to do your own analysis for any situation that you're encountering in your workplace. All of the participants' lines are on mute. If you have a question, you can submit it through the Q&A widget that's on the toolbar. Please don't use the raise your hand feature. That's not something that we're able to see on our end, but we do see the Q&A. And we'll feel free to submit the questions at any point during the webinar. We'll try to answer them as they come in, and we will save a few minutes at the end to answer any questions that may have come up during the presentation if we haven't already gotten to them. And so let's get started. Luke, do you want to talk through some of the leaves that employees may be taking?
Yeah, I would love to. And before we get going, I also want to apologize for the glare that I'm sure that I'm creating, even with this beautiful circle light that we have here. We only have half an hour this morning, and I think Amy and I could talk about any one of the leaves or any one of the mistakes that we're going to discuss for over an hour.
Yeah.
So time's really of the essence. Just really briefly, some of the laws that apply or may apply to New York employers that we are going to be referring today are FMLA, the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act. And that leave applies to employers with over 50 employees, to employees who have been there for a year, and some other requirements. And it is a type of leave that protects employees' jobs for up to 12 weeks for their own serious health condition, for the serious health condition of a family member, for a new addition to the family, and in certain military exigency circumstances. So that's one leave, federal leave. There is a state paid family leave. New York's unique, pretty unique in having one of these. And this is a type of leave that eligible employees can take. Typically, it's via insurance benefit, but it's protected leave and pay.
Yes.
And this is for employees who have a family member with a serious health condition. It's not for the employee's own condition or for a new addition to the family as well. There's also some general shorter term leave laws in New York that are applicable. Paid sick leave is just a paid time off that employers are mandated to provide up to 56 hours in a year for employees for a variety of medical and safe related reasons. And new this year, paid prenatal leave, which is up to 20 hours in a year for pregnancy related care, fertility treatments, for our employees, right? So that's the high level background. There's also some other things floating around: disability benefits, workers' comp benefits, beyond the scope of what we're talking about today.
And I think another important thing to keep in mind is that with any leave, you may also be encountering an accommodation issue under the ADA and the human rights law, because providing additional leave beyond what's covered by a statute may be a reasonable accommodation under those laws. So one more factor at play.
Yeah, it's always floating around, and if it's the employee's own condition, it's always involved.
Right.
So let's jump into some of these mistakes we see.
Let's do it.
And put ourselves out of work.
Okay.
All right. So one of the calls that I get pretty frequently starts with something along the lines of, we've had an employee who's been out of work for 4 months. Can we fire them? Right? Isn't enough here? And I start by asking a bunch of questions. Why are they out? What's going on? Say, oh, it's their own condition. All right, it's been more than 12 weeks. So are we through FMLA? And a response that I get is, yep. And I say, okay, did you can I see the documents, right? Did you let the employee know that they're on leave? When did the clock start counting? And sometimes I hear back, well, there's nothing. They told us they needed leave and they went out. And there are some issues here. First, it's always a best practice, and you will hear it from Amy and me and all of our colleagues. It's always a best practice to document everything, right? Documents don't lose memory. They stay the course of time and they help us remember what happened. And in leave, it can be critically important. I think under the FMLA, there are required written notices that we have to give, or else we may interfere with the leave. And it may not actually count as FMLA leave at all. So the biggest reminder that I would like to give you here is that if you have an employee who's requested leave and you're covered by the FMLA, we need to make a decision as to whether that leave is FMLA leave or not, and actually give them a written designation notice. Thankfully, the FMLA or the Department of Labor provides forms for this, so you can just Google designation notice, FMLA, and you can use that form to do it. But within 5 days, 5 business days of knowing enough to know that the leave is FMLA leave, you actually have to give that written notice to the employee. You should keep a copy for your files as well. And that notice says, you're going to be on FMLA leave for this reason. Here's the time we're counting against. And if you don't do it, the Department of Labor would take the position, courts would take the position, that's not FMLA leave, right? So when you call me after 4 months, we might need to start that clock now and run another 12 weeks of FMLA leave. Yeah.
Look, I do have a question about that. So what if, you've asked the employee for documentation, they haven't gotten it back to you? Can you designate conditionally or retroactively once you get more information?
Yeah, there's a few things that you can do. And first of all, if the employee doesn't give the paperwork, one thing that we could and should consider doing is actually formally not denying the leave, right? And waiting for the paperwork so that that's actually in writing and not just hanging out there with no decision. And when it comes to retroactively designating leave, you can do it, right? There are some caveats here, but in my hypothetical call that I receive often, and it's been 4 months and this should have been FMLA leave, but we never told the employee, you are allowed to give them a notice now and say, we're counting from the day you went out as FMLA leave, but only if it doesn't prejudice the employee. And so what that means is that the employee would have actually taken that leave anyway, regardless of whether it was counting against them as FMLA leave. This typically is something that can be done when it's for the employee's own serious health condition, because if the employee has hip replacement surgery and they're out for 4 months in recovery, they wouldn't have made a different decision whether it's they wouldn't have had a choice, right? But when we're talking about family care, they might have made a different choice if they knew that it was going to count against their FMLA leave entitlement. So we might have to have a different conversation. So as far as this first mistake, it's a failure to document. And I would want our employers to document every type of leave and accommodation, but it's critically important for FMLA decisions. The other note I wanted to make is that on the accommodation front, it's also really important to document the process and including what accommodations are being provided. It is legally required in New York City, but it's a good idea everywhere. And that way we have something to point to that we engaged in the process, we granted an accommodation, and we can set conditions around when we'll check in and how this will work. So that is the first mistake that we see.
I'll move on to our second one. So a lot of times, and this does tie in with FMLA leave, we see employers not running all of the available leaves concurrently when they're able to do so. So for example, someone may be taking leave that qualifies under more than one statute. They may be taking leave to care for a family member that would qualify as unpaid leave under the FMLA, and also leave under the New York State Paid Family Leave Act. And maybe it's documented under one, but not the other. And we'll hear things like, well, I didn't get this piece of paper back on the FMLA side, or I didn't get this, they didn't file for PFL. Both laws do allow employers to sort of, we'll say, cross designate the leaves if it qualifies under both statutes. So you want to make sure that you are assessing each leave to see what statutes might apply, what leaves might be available, and where you're permitted to do so, making sure that you are running those leaves concurrently. And the reason that's important is it, in a sense, requires the employees to use up the leave. They're not able to stack them one on top of another and extend their period of absence, which creates more disruption for the workplace, is harder to manage oftentimes for employers. So when you can, you want to be using these leaves concurrently. Now, back in January, the Department of Labor put out an opinion letter that talks about how FMLA works with other leaves and when they can run concurrent and all of that stuff, and when you can use paid time, right? So sometimes an employee may be off on leave, and it's unpaid or it's only partially paid, and they have available vacation time or other paid time off that they could use to supplement and make up their lost wages. Well, you can't do that in every circumstance. In some cases, you can force it. In some cases, the employee can choose to do it. And in others, you have to mutually agree. So the Department of Labor issued an opinion letter that attempts to clarify this for employers. And the three rules are: if an employee is taking leave under a state paid family or medical leave program, so something like paid family leave, disability, workers' comp, those types of leaves, that leave would also be covered by FMLA. And the employer must designate it as FMLA leave and count that time against the FMLA leave entitlement. So you can run all of those concurrently. If the state or the state paid leave program fully covers wages while the employee is out, then no one can require substitution of paid leave. You couldn't say, we want you to use your sick days first, or we're going to count this against your sick time or your vacation time. You're not able to count that against their available accrued paid leave. However, if whatever leave program they're taking only covers part of their wages or doesn't cover their wages at all, right? They're on unpaid leave or only partially paid leave, then the employer and the employee can agree together, where state law permits, to use paid leave to supplement the wages. So you have that option by agreement to supplement wages when someone is receiving partial payment.
And it has to be agreed on both sides.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So it's not that the employee can insist on it either.
Right.
I think typically we would want, or employers would want, to open that option.
Yes.
Right, just to allow employees to receive full pay and to run down some of that available time too.
Right. So they're not tacking it on at the end when their statutory leave may have expired and they say, well, I have, 4 weeks of vacation left. I want to tack that on the end.
All right. Should we jump into a third mistake?
Let's do it.
All right. So another call I get, it's been a year, right? And people call and say, hey, we've had 2 employees who have been out. It was workers' comp, right? They've been out for a year. We haven't heard anything, and we think it's time to just get them off payroll and process separation.
Yeah. Common call.
Yeah. And I say, oh, okay, well, a year is a long time. What's going on with the employee? And the response I get sometimes is, we have no idea. We haven't heard a word since they went out of work. And I think this is a mistake that employers make, a failure to communicate with an employee on leave. There's no legal requirement to communicate with someone on an approved leave, but it is a great idea when someone is on an extended leave to engage in pretty frequent communications to check in, to understand the employee's intent to return to work, to understand their need for more time, right? Typically what we'd want to do is approve a period of time, and whether that's under FMLA or paid family leave or something else, we want to approve a period of time. And then as the date of that approved time comes up, we want to be speaking with the employee, letters, emails, calls to say, hey, your time is running out. Where are you? Are you able to return? If they need more time, we'd like to get medical documentation to support that, so that we have an ongoing dialogue of where the employee is, what their intent is, what their need for additional leave is, and maybe even a two-way street. And we're communicating things that are going on in the workplace, especially when there's structural changes for one of these employees who's been out for a year. Maybe their position would have changed or other changes have gone on. And it is a best practice to engage in that open communication so that when you call me after a year and I say, what's going on? You can say, well, we just got our most recent note at 9 months. It indicated there's no return to work date. And then we can have a more productive discussion about moving forward to next steps. So the third issue we see is not communicating at all. And I would encourage employers to engage in communication regarding the leave or return to work, accommodations needed, which I think leads into something you wanted to discuss, Amy.
Yeah, well, and just sort of staying on that mistake number 3 for a minute, because it does lead into mistake 4, but oftentimes I find that employers are relying on the carriers to provide the information. So if someone is out on disability or they're out on workers' comp,
Yeah.
they're just taking the information that's coming in through that carrier, which is often very limited, and using that to say, oh, well, they're still approved to be out, as opposed to understanding what the employee's real restrictions are, how they interplay with the actual job the employee is expected to do. And there may be opportunities to either get employees back sooner if there were more interaction between the employer and the employee, or to figure out the employee's never coming back, right?
Right.
It's clear they're just not going to come back.
Yeah.
So I think, being proactive and using the opportunity to get information outside of those processes is
Yeah.
important for employers to take advantage of.
Yes.
So mistake 4, Luke stole a little bit of my thunder. It's waiting until the last minute to prepare for an employee's return. So we receive calls frequently, the employee was supposed to be back yesterday, or the employee is coming back tomorrow. We don't have updated medical information. Can we terminate them? We strongly recommend that if you know someone's coming back at least a few weeks before, maybe even up to a month before, if they've been out for a long time, you want to connect with that employee and figure out where things stand with them, right? Do they have restrictions that may need to be accommodated? You might need some time to put that in place, and you want to have that dialogue before they're expected to return so that you're not pushing out the return unnecessarily. You can get someone back to work sooner. It's also important to have a conversation with them if you're going to require some kind of fit for duty exam. You want to be able to have them get that completed in advance of when they would be expected to return. So having an early dialogue with the employee about any job changes, as Luke mentioned, restrictions, is there a need for more leave, can really help with the planning. And it also helps you make an informed decision about whether different types of accommodations, whether it's in the workplace or additional leave, are reasonable.
Yeah. This is a place where I'd like to see that ongoing communication too. And there's an opportunity to send a really self-serving but productive letter or email to the employee to say, you've been approved until this date.
Right.
This date's coming up. Before that date,
Take this to your doctor.
yeah, we either need a clearance to return to work, parentheses, with or without accommodations, and identifying any accommodations or restrictions necessary, or we need a note extending your time so that we can consider any additional requests when they come in.
Yeah.
And I think that is a helpful recipe to support any ultimate decisions down the road if we have the document trail, right, tying together the first mistake with the third and the fourth, just having a clear trail.
Yeah. And instead of just saying, go get a note from your doctor if you have restrictions, I find it's really helpful if the employee can take a questionnaire from the employer that sort of lays out, these are my job duties. These are the things I'm expected to do on a day-to-day basis. And, how does my condition impact my ability to do those? And do I need any type of accommodation so that the doctor has the full picture, and you're getting good information back about how, if at all, they can do their job or any restrictions they may have. 2 other quick points on this preparing to return. You can't have a 100% fit for duty requirement, right? So an employee may come back with some kind of restrictions, and employers have to sit down and think about whether there are accommodations that can be provided to address those. You can't say, if you're not 100%, you're not coming back. The other thing that we often get calls about is, hey, the FMLA period is ending, the 12 weeks are up, can we terminate someone? Or, if they don't come back, can we terminate them? Or the 6-month short-term disability period is ending, they're not ready to come back, can we terminate them?
Yeah.
Courts, the EEOC, the division have come out and said, hard and fast timeframes for employees to return are not acceptable. So if someone needs to take leave beyond a statutory period, you need to consider whether that's a reasonable accommodation. And it may or may not be,
Yeah.
depending on the circumstances. Each case really should be decided on its own merits.
Yeah, and as you know, it doesn't really matter if the employer's trying to apply a strict cutoff at
Right.
12 weeks, at 26 weeks, or even if it's 2 years.
Right.
Whatever it is, I think the idea is we have to engage in this case-by-case analysis once they've reached the end of the road.
Right.
For whatever the benefit or the policy is. All right. I do see one question that I just want to address as we move to the
Sure.
next, and there are others that we have as well.
Sure.
But that's, what do you do? We've talked a lot about communicating with an employee on leave, and the question that we have is, what if the employee is not responsive? And that happens, right? You may have employees that have moved on mentally, right? Or have something else going on, or just don't want to respond. And I think one thing that we can do there is be clear in our communications. So
Right.
when you're sending that letter we discussed, as the return to work date approaches, here's your end date is over. We need either return to work with or without accommodations, or extension of leave, medical documentation. You can give the employee a response deadline. Say, we
Right.
need this information by this date. And when that date comes and goes, and the return to work date comes and goes, and they're not here, I think then we can base a next step on the failure to communicate,
Mhm.
right? An employer or the employer and the employee must engage in any interactive process around accommodations and this return to work. And so if the employee is dropping the ball, that's something that we can act on.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to give at least a reasonable amount of time for the employee to get the information.
Mhm.
So I'm asked that all the time, what's a reasonable time frame? And I usually say between like 10 to 14 days. So you have maybe a weekend in there. Some doctors move quickly, others do
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, and you'd hope that you set a deadline, the employee, if there's a problem, they should be reaching out
Yeah.
and saying, I'm sorry, the earliest I could get in is this day. If you hear absolutely nothing, we feel more comfortable
Right.
moving on. Let's get to the fifth mistake that we have, and I would just generally and charitably call this mistake confusion related to discipline and performance management while employees are on leave or have a leave or accommodation coming up. In my cynical seat as an employment lawyer, I observe that every single time an employee is getting a tough message about performance or discipline and they see it coming, they all of a sudden need leave. In my mind, this happens 90% of the time.
It does happen frequently.
I'm sure in reality, it's very rare.
Yeah.
But employers will call us and they'll be freaking out a little bit. We were just about to deliver a PIP. It's been written, and the employee said they need to go out for at least 2 months due to anxiety and stress related reasons. Now what on earth do we do? Do we give it to them right away? Do we fire them? We can never do this, right? We got to let them come back. And I think it is true that timing of adverse employment actions around leave and request for leave and accommodations is a bad factor, right? It makes things look like it could be because of the leave or because of the disability or accommodation. But the way that I would encourage employers to think about this is these are two separate tracks. On a leave and accommodation front, we are happy to provide employees with the rights that they have. And we have that as a separate conversation and we let it go. But on the performance front, that is a separate track that also needs to be addressed. And if an employee ends up going on leave after the delivery of an evaluation, but before the PIP that was maybe referenced there, or the PIP that's in the works, all we do is press pause. We let the employee go out. And when they come back, depending on the circumstances before and what's in our record, it might be that the day or the day after they come back, we sit down with the employee and we say, look, welcome back. We're glad you're here. Now let's pick up on some of those performance concerns that we were talking about before you left, right? taking of a leave or taking of or requesting or having an accommodation is not any sort of get out of jail free card for performance concerns and behavior disciplinary issues. What we need to do, though, is make sure those are two completely different conversations, right? We need to have our employment, our leave accommodation conversation here, and our performance and behavior conversation here, and keep those apart. Don't reference either in either side of the documents, and just push pause while the employee is on leave. I've had situations where a termination decision has actually been made before a leave, and in that case, it can be complicated. Do you communicate the decision during the period of leave? Do you wait till they come back? It's all going to look bad.
Yeah.
But if the decision truly has been made before, a lot of times we just wait for the employee to come back and we say, we're glad you're able to come back, but you're fired.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the key here is to make sure that everything is supported in our records, because we will have to be able to tell the story if challenged, that our decision was based on legitimate performance, behavior concerns, and not based on the leave, which of course we granted and allowed.
And objective concerns, right? The more objective criteria that you can find related to performance as opposed to subjective feelings about performance, that's gonna help overcome that presumption that the two may be tied together in some inappropriate way. So we are getting close to the end of our time. I want to take a quick moment to give you the credit information, and then we'll move to any questions that may have come in. So if you are looking to receive HRCI credit today, your code number is 707379. Again, the HRCI credit number is 707379. If you're looking to receive SHRM credit, your credit code will be 25-QU5J3. Again, that code for SHRM is 25-QU5J3. And the CLE code is LEAVE, LEAVE. Again, CLE code is LEAVE. So those are our codes, and we'll turn to some questions, which Luke, I think you have.
Yeah, good thing I have my glasses on. Behind the scenes for these questions I'm reading on 10-point font. A couple quick questions I think that we can get to in the time we have. So one is on this concurrent running, and it says, look, we've given the employee FMLA and PFL forms. They've only returned PFL forms. Are we allowed to designate it as FMLA leave as well? Do you have an answer for that, Amy?
I would say yes, because under the FMLA, if an employer has enough information to reasonably believe that the leave qualifies for FMLA leave, they can designate it. And if there's a mistake later on and you get information that suggests it wasn't qualified, you can always undesignate it.
Yeah.
But if you think that's covered and you're just not getting information back, you can start that clock.
Yeah, and that would be my recommendation, right? If we know enough to know the employee is eligible for both, they've applied for and been approved maybe by your carrier for PFL, I would go ahead, and especially if it's a continuous leave, just designate it as FMLA and say, we're running FMLA concurrent, even if you didn't return the cert.
Yeah.
You could take a different approach and require a certification and deny FMLA, but let PFL run. But then at the end of the day, the employee may have additional time and it could create some real conflict with that time.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, the short answer is yes, you can designate FMLA, even if you don't get the forms. You don't have to even request a certification. If you know enough, or you have faith in the employee's reason, or you understand that they in fact are pregnant and going to, you can just designate it.
Now, what about on the flip, designating PFL? Because it can count towards their time, but how do they get their benefit?
Yeah, this one's tricky. But so if an employee provides FMLA paperwork but chooses not to provide PFL paperwork, they're not going to receive the PFL benefit because the carrier is not going to approve the leave. But you are actually able to designate and count the PFL time. There's not a specific form or process for this, but under the regulations, you can say, look, we didn't get your PFL paperwork. This is PFL qualifying leave. We're counting your PFL time.
And it would behoove you to tell the employee you're doing that so that they can get their paperwork in and receive payment if they're entitled to it.
Yeah. I see, I don't know about our time cutting off. What happens? Right at half an hour, it cuts out, we go black.
We're good. We can go a few
Okay.
minutes over.
So there's another question that I can read here that is about as you're engaging in this dialogue with an employee who's out, what time frame do you use, or is there a specific form or formula for when it becomes apparent the employee will be unable to return? And I think on this one, it is unfortunately no. This is a case by case basis where we're sort of looking at where the employee is, where they have been, and what our most recent information is. It's sort of a sliding scale. The longer we've been, the better we would feel about a decision to move on. Also, if you ever get a document that says out indefinitely or no return to work date or
Call us and we'll act fast.
yeah. And the only thing I would add here is I would wait to make that decision until after we're through the protected types of leave. So I'd at least let us get through the 12 weeks of FMLA. Typically it wouldn't be that way for paid family leave. The employee would be physically capable of returning.
Right.
But I'd at least wait till the protected time is off and then just see what kind of documentation and messaging we have from the employee. And, if they're talking about a week, it's probably tough. A month, 4 months,
Yeah.
indefinite.
And it's gonna depend
Yeah.
on their position, who
Yeah.
else can do the work, what type of impact it has on the company. So there are so many different factors at
Yeah.
play that it's impossible to have a hard and fast rule.
Yeah. So that one's tough.
Any other questions?
I think somebody might have missed this is what are mistakes 3 and 5? Well, these are both mine, so I'm kind of disappointed that somebody tuned out for those or I wasn't clear. But so mistake
Not
3, mistake 3 is I won't be back, I guess is what that question says. So mistake 3 was failing to communicate during the period of leave, right?
Mhm.
Which we should engage in that communication. And mistake 5 is just the confusion relating to either needing to be overly aggressive in disciplining or performance management for someone on leave, or feeling like we can't do anything,
Right.
right? Instead, making sure we just continue both paths on separate tracks.
And so with that, I think we'll wrap up, but I do want to give a quick teaser for our next session in June, which will be June 11th. June 10th. I'm not sure.
It'll be in June.
It's the 11th. I'm sorry. We've been waffling on dates. It's June 11th. And we're going to talk about the EEO1 component data collection that needs to happen. You may have seen yesterday that the EEOC put out a press release on that, talking about collecting the data for those employers that need to do it. And so we'll give some tips on that, but we'll also talk a little bit more about the EEOC's different agenda items that we've seen coming out of the agency, including this deprioritization of disparate impact claims. Now, the EEOC might not be processing them, but that doesn't mean courts won't. So we just want to talk through some of those issues that we're seeing.
Okay.
All right. And with that, we hope everyone has a great day. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next month.